recorded. So I'm turning the recording on now. And I'd like to introduce Melanie Armstrong, who is going to lead this session. And she has a crew of additional presenters today. So she's got, I think, 4 of them, and they will introduce themselves. And at this point, everybody looks like they are muted, and it looks as though you have your videos off, so appreciate that. And with that said, Melanie, go ahead and take it away.
And like a good environmental educator, I'm going to pass things off immediately to Hannah Schaeffer Tibbett to get us started.
Hi everyone, as Melanie just said, my name's Hannah, and I want to speak for everyone in our team that we're really excited to have you here during this session with us today, which will be touching on emerging ideas in EE research. And so to start, I want you to think about a digital resource that you've been using maybe pre-COVID, post-COVID, or during COVID. So think about a digital resource, and then what I'd like you to do is to shoot that digital resource into the chat box and include why you like and enjoy that digital resource that you've used within EE or within the broader spectrum. And then also include your affiliation and your name. So again, include a digital resource, why you enjoy that digital resource or utilizing that digital resource, your name, and then also your affiliation within that chat box. And then in the end, well, my colleague Jen here is going to compile the list of digital resources that you'll be putting into the chat box, and then we'll share it with everyone in the end. So you all would like to do that. Rose, okay, there you go. Now I see it. Awesome. So I guess as we're waiting, we can do introductions for the team. I'll just start. My name's Hannah, and I have a master's degree in environmental management, and I've been engaged in EE throughout my whole life, from attending interpretive programs with my parents, who was leading them when I was in preschool, to becoming an interpretive park ranger at Grand Teton National Park. And I see the true value in EE, and it's a really exciting field and rewarding field for me. So I'm really glad to be a part of it.
Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer, and I also graduated from Western Colorado University with a master's in environmental management. And previously I worked for North Carolina State Parks as an education specialist. And I've worked at Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory doing youth programs. And now I'm working for the Gunnison Ranger District on a camping project. But I'm glad to be here and to see all your faces, well, names. I don't really see a lot of faces.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Botsford, and I too went to Western Colorado University and have a master's in environmental management. My experience with environmental education goes back to when I was a small kid attending camps on my own, to working in a variety of settings, mostly back on the East Coast. I'm from the West Coast, but it's interesting to think most of my work has been on the East Coast, so a close place in my heart for that. Currently, I'm working as a park ranger out in Northern California with some on-call wildland firefighting. So I'm very busy, very active, and I'm really enjoying it. So I'm glad you all are here.
And I'm Melanie Armstrong. I'm a faculty member in the Master in Environmental Management program here at Western Colorado University. I've been here for about 5 years, and prior to that, I worked in environmental education and interpretation for the National Park Service for 15 years. So that is part of what prompted my excitement to be involved in the Digital Junior Ranger project, which the students will be presenting. Former students now, they all graduated, yay. Former students will be presenting later in the session today. So I want to share my excitement and appreciation to them for the incredible work they've done on this project. And I know that you will find it an exciting and particularly timely discussion of how to apply and integrate best practices in digital technologies into environmental education. But this session initially formed before we heard of the novel coronavirus. And we really were deeply immersed in this Digital Junior Ranger project and asking those types of questions. But I want to give a shout out to one student who isn't able to be with us today. She's an environmental educator with Curacanti National Recreation Area here on the Western Slope, and is off grid today at a staff retreat. So, but Kelly Wood was highly involved in doing the research part of this and compiling our bibliography of sources and so forth. So I just wanted to give a big thanks to her for her background work on the project.
Awesome. I also forgot to mention my current work right now. This is Hannah speaking. I'm currently working with the STORE Corps in Gunnison County and the National Forest Foundation, leading stewardship work and environmental education out in our valley. But looking at this chat box, it's super neat to see, you know, people's interests, people's backgrounds, and the resources that they're providing. And like I said, Jen is compiling a list of those resources so you can have those in the end to walk away with. But I wish we could go through and, you know, have you each talk about this resource, but unfortunately time is limited. But it's really nice to meet you all through the chat box and through Zoom, essentially. But I think that's good for the introductions now. And Melanie, if you wanted to jump into your next section.
All right, is that screen coming through okay? Great. All right, so we formulated this session around the invitation to consider what's new in environmental education, and particularly what I think is important is the idea of how to really integrate and apply these kind of theoretical research ideas into practices in environmental education. So I wanted to reframe the question, though, in the beginning around these emerging ideas in EE and how to go about finding them, and refer you to, if you aren't already familiar with it, to one of my favorite resources in the from the North American Association for Environmental Education, and this is their research library. So this is a screenshot of the front of that page, but just an incredible resource, easy to search. But what I'm most impressed with is the skills or talent of the amazing intern or researcher, whoever they have behind the scenes, who is going through this research, summarizing it, and creating a nice, succinct, big picture application comment at the end. So you can open up any article here. It will let you know the full text is available. You can search only by full text articles, but then you can pull up and look right at the end, and it will tell you the key application of the research study. So an incredible resource. And because most of these sources today that I'm going to refer to are drawn from this, I didn't prepare a take-home bibliography. I'm certainly happy to share this PowerPoint slide with anyone who has that interest. But it's so readily accessible and easy to use that I would simply refer you to NAAE's research library. So without further ado then, I'm going to quickly summarize what I see as some of the most interesting research that came out in the environmental education world over the last year or so. And I'm gonna start with some general articles of interest and then focus it in more specifically on this question about using digital products. And I think, again, particularly timely because the research cycle of peer review in the academic world takes a while. We're not really seeing peer-reviewed articles coming out regarding COVID and the impacts that that's had in environmental education or in education more broadly. But I suspect we will certainly see that in the next couple months coming through in force. But in the meantime, I hope this provides at least a sample of some of what we could take from that, even without or with the principles of the research that was already underway. So I want to start with some articles that focus on the value of environmental education, broadly speaking. I think most of us who are here already have drunk this Kool-Aid, as our keynote said yesterday. But I think that it's always worth exploring the new ways that people are finding applications to the value of EE. So I found this study to be particularly interesting in terms of a quantified research into outcomes for both health and STEM capability among low-income youth. And this was work with 3 elementary and middle schools in the St. Louis public school districts who did nature-based education for an entire academic year. And they then surveyed them using some quantified measures that measured their health outcomes and their capability in engaging in STEM education. And the results showed a significant increase in the STEM capacity and quality of life. And you can see in the summary on the right there that the focus groups particularly talked about the environmentally conscious decisions, engaged families, healthy behaviors, leadership, and team building skills. One point that I thought was particularly interesting was that older students showed larger gains than younger students did in terms of outcomes. And the application here, of course, is that this could potentially help reduce some of the health and educational disparities of low-income, urban, Black, and Hispanic youth. I thought this one was particularly interesting, that parents reported a high value in outdoor play, but didn't see its learning value. So in a survey of parents regarding how much time they supported in outdoor activity during the school day, they found that students were highly supportive of it. About half of them said, less than 50 minutes was an appropriate amount of time for outdoor play and learning. But their support for outdoor learning went up when it was a structured environment. So when a teacher was really putting really strong parameters around that outdoor experience, as opposed to simply sending kids outside to play. So something to think about in terms of parental support for your programs, in thinking about providing some structure to help parents feel the value of the outdoor learning and outdoor activity. Because of the work that I do, I'm particularly interested in some studies that came out around college students. I thought this one was interesting, that went back and looked at how much interaction college-age students had as children in natural environments, whether that's because of where they lived or by formal participation in environmental education programs. And they found that their students' grades in environmental science courses in college improved when they had interacted with forests as a child. And it was indicated not only in their performance in the class in terms of grades, but also how much they enjoyed the class and were satisfied with the class. So in thinking about long-term effects of early childhood education and exposure, and also trends in higher education, where more students are coming from urban backgrounds, and what that's going to mean in terms of how we teach at a college level. And then we've all heard this idea that nature improves mental and physical well-being, and I appreciated this review study that really tried to quantify exactly how much nature was needed to show these physiological and psychological improvements. And so this was a review article that looked at other studies that had been done and tried to understand their methods and what their conclusions were. And they came out with as little as 10 to 20 minutes in nature can serve as a preventative measure for stress and mental health strain for college-age students. As a researcher at a college, of course, we recognize how much research is done on our test subjects, the readily accessible population. In this survey, it certainly showed that attention to college students is out there. But I think particularly timely in this moment when we've thought so much about how COVID is impacting the college age demographic as well. That transitions to a series of work that focuses on nature connection more generally, looking at the many ways that environmental education fosters connections to nature. And park prescriptions has sort of risen as a popular approach to this, and we're seeing more and more research coming out that actually shows how park prescriptions are applied in the field and the outcomes of applying park prescriptions. So this would be where doctors actually instruct, prescribe, using the medical terminology, patients who are suffering from health problems to spend time in an outdoor setting. And this particular study that just came out this year looked at how access to parks was the interplay between access to these park areas and park prescriptions. And they found that certainly these programs of park prescriptions increased park use, but that people who lived in low-income areas, urban areas, places where they didn't feel safe in a park, that they identified those as barriers to achieving their prescriptions. So the recommendation from this study was to think about when organizations prescribe park activities as a means to mental and physical health, to think about how those barriers can be overcome in very specific ways. The rise in thinking about mindfulness in environmental education has certainly emerged in the research in the last few years, and thinking about what mindfulness, how that is different from traditional more forms of environmental instruction. And this research was really comparing mindfulness outcomes to sort of more traditional ways of identifying a connection to nature that they prescribed as similar to indigenous communities. And so they argued that nature activities that are integrated with components of mindfulness, such as breathing, meditations, listening exercises, observing the landscape, watching, feeling, smelling, would cultivate feelings of interrelatedness with the rest of the natural world. So if you're looking to improve senses of interrelatedness in your programs, definitely something to think about would be mindfulness activities. And the last one before I move into digital, just a fun one that I really loved, was a study of bird feeders. Bird feeders as a way to help people connect to nature. And they did a study where they gave participants a bird feeder for a month. They did baseline work, so ruling out people who already had bird feeders and were already users of bird feeders, and comparing that to a control group and a group that received a bird feeder to use for a month. And they found that these were parents and sixth grade students, or adults and sixth grade students. And what I think is amazing is they found that bird feeders helped the adults connect to nature and improved their connection to nature scores, similar to the effect of tourism or going to a zoo or a museum. But the sixth grade students showed no change in connection to nature upon receiving the bird feeders. So they argue that there, of course, could be a ripple effect here, because if adult connections increase, that kids might be sort of brought along in that process. But I really loved in this study the approach to thinking about bird feeders as something that was accessible, very cheap, that it's easy to provide bird feeders to people, and they can be used in urban landscapes, and they have, it's a recurring exposure. You're continually looking at your bird feeder and observing nature and encountering nature in that particular way. So a fun study, I thought, looking at bird feeders. I'm not looking ahead far enough in my slides, so I forgot that I do have a section here on climate change education. A few studies, I pulled mostly from the review studies looking at the broader trends in climate change education. This one's particularly interesting in terms of how most environmental education programs have been promoting individual consumptive behaviors, and after reviewing the literature, these authors recommended a shift to thinking about macro level energy transitions. So really thinking about the big picture behind the big picture forces, social forces that influence climate change. And if we can find ways that we can really shift our thinking around that, it shows high potential to create actually more energy and support for climate change initiatives among students. Climate change education is changing our approaches to EE. I thought this was also interesting. If you look at the summary on the right, you'll easily recognize prominent themes in environmental education have been focusing on the personally relevant and using active and engaging teaching methods. That's hopefully something that everyone here that sort of resonates with us as how we do EE. But as the survey of how climate change education is being taught, they found 4 specific trends in climate change education. And that is engaging in deliberative discussions, interactions with scientists, addressing misconceptions, and implementing school or community projects. So as we think about how climate change is changing our methods as environmental educators, this research points to 4 techniques that we're employing more because we are trying to teach about climate change. And I think it will be interesting to see how this plays out in other forms of environmental education in terms of how we integrate interactions with scientists, how we develop project-based learning, or simply having discussions that talk about misconceptions, poor information, and deliberative decision-making. And finally, I thought this one was great, looking at a year-long study again of college students who were taking a course focused specifically on climate change education and comparing that with their individual behaviors. And the study found that because of this 1-year course, that students increased their personal connection to climate change solutions, but they also reduced their carbon footprint by 2.82 tons of CO2 per year. So they found a quantifiable change in greenhouse gas emissions that came about because of a climate change education course. And they traced this for 5 years and found that 5 years later, students were still attributing pro-environmental decisions to the course. So I'm going to transition now to talking a little bit about digital experiences, and we'll be applying these later in our discussion as we think about how to implement the latest and greatest research in developing digital learning techniques. So again, real quick, a study looking at augmented reality. This one looked at marine environments under the idea that not everyone is able to go to an ocean to study a marine environment. So given that, what other techniques could we use? And this research used augmented reality along with educational games and storytelling. And they found that augmented reality worked, that it actually increased students' memory skills and their motivation to learn, particularly among students who are classified as low academic achievers. Secondly, a study looking at tablet use at Carlsbad Caverns National Park. This survey followed up with interpreters who were tasked with using tablets in the field to interact with park visitors and talking to them about their experiences. And what the interpreters report is that because they were using tablets, they actually interacted longer with park visitors. They used different sources, and they said that children reacted with amazement to the tablets. They particularly appreciated the dynamic nature of the media, so they could show an animation of what it looks like to fly as a bat. And they used the tablets to talk about research techniques and technologies. And visitors expressed gratitude for the tablets and the ability to expand their experience and explain the scientific background. Interestingly, in this study, 4 of the interpreters refused to use them. After my years in environmental education, I believe that. And they did that citing sort of that traditional need to connect with the place and not be distracted by a tablet. However, the research is showing that iPads don't overshadow our interest in nature, and that they may in fact be more social than paper. So a study of students doing the same activities, some of them doing them on paper, and I believe this was an invertebrate study or invertebrate work in the field with kids. And some did the work on paper and some did the work using a tablet. And the research showed that the tablet did not overshadow the students' interest in looking at the bugs and spending time doing or observing nature. And the researchers proposed that if educators emphasize that these are tools for learning and for furthering our exploration, that it can actually support learning and doesn't just distract from the lesson at hand. Similarly, a study looking at mobile devices in museums, they found that students who were using a mobile device, in this case cell phones, as they traveled through a museum, spent more time in the museum. They were less distracted by other things and were more likely to learn new things by using their mobile devices. The key here was that they had to provide instructions ahead of time of how to use those devices. So they found a significant difference in the ways that students spent their time when they were just given the mobile device versus when they were given the mobile device with instruction. So as you develop this or develop possibilities for using such devices, thinking about how to enhance that with well-formulated instructions ahead of time. Got a couple more here and then we'll move on to some more active engagement. Looking at animal programs, this of course has long been sort of a foundation point within environmental education in thinking about how to teach different scientific principles and foster a nature connection. And so this program was interested, or this research was interested in the difference between virtual animal programs and live animal programs, and they used bees as a subject in their study. And so one group was taught a unit on bees using only virtual techniques, and another group was interacting with beehives in the field. And the research found that students reported comparable increases in knowledge about bees, both immediately after the program and 6 to 9 weeks following that. And I thought most interesting, they found positive correlations between their perceptions of bee conservation and bee knowledge as well. So the values accompanied the increase in knowledge. This research showed that digital tools increased interest in observing nature for at-risk youth. So a particular study looking at students at risk for low school performance due to low socioeconomic status. And they were given different technologies. So a control group used no digital technologies, and then the study group used GPS devices, cameras, tablets in an environmental education unit. And the outcomes found that the digital technology didn't detract from their learning and may have contributed to an increase in confidence and an increase in interest in observing nature. So considering the potential of technology to increase the interest of students to continue to engage in the scientific conversation. And finally, just a note about framing. This is a study that looked at conservation messages by video, and they selected videos that were kind of your traditional negative conservation, doom and gloom and apocalypse type videos, some that were more positive in their messaging, and some that were coded as neutral. And then they asked participants to respond to them in terms of how much money they would give to an environmental organization on this issue, and how positive how they felt about the message on a scale from positive to negative. And they found that respondents were willing to donate more time and money to positively framed videos and to recommend, and so their recommendation is that conservation groups focus their efforts on positive messages. Phew, that was a whirlwind tour of some environmental research. And I'm excited to see kind of what came out in chats and conversations. But if anyone has a question, I'm going to pull up another PowerPoint sort of introducing some application principles, but feel free to chime in with a question while I do so. I feel like I can almost visually see the wind in your hair from that whirlwind sharing. All right. So what we want to do to think about and hopefully allow some of this research to sink in a little bit is to talk about a project that we did to create a digital junior ranger program for the National Historic Trails program. So this was a partnership between Western Colorado University and the National Park Service. As a quick introduction, National Historic Trails are part of the National Trail System, which includes scenic trails and other trails, but we're thinking of like the Santa Fe Trail, the Camino Real, the Mormon Pioneer Trail, the California Trail, the Oregon Trail, the Trail of Tears, and this Old Spanish Trail coming here through Colorado. And so the National Park Service approached us with a question around how to better engage youth with the stories of the National Historic Trails. There are some particular challenges to working on National Historic Trails that may be different from what other park units and more locally based, place-based education faces. These are long trails that cross into multiple states. You could literally drive along many of these trails for days at a time. They don't have visitor centers in the traditional sense where you might see a family stopping to pick up a junior ranger booklet or engage with a park ranger in a particular way. They don't have many buildings at all. Sometimes these are just kind of remote trail ruts on the landscape. They often get developed over. There are cities and highways and such built upon the tangible resource itself. And so there are a lot of challenges to developing a system or a way to interact and engage with youth along a site like this. But the National Park Service saw that there were also some opportunities. Most of the country's population lives within 100 miles of one of these National Historic Trails. So there's a great local connection and opportunity to reach a lot of people in where they're at and have those meaningful localized conversations, for example. So the particular challenge that we were presented with was to capitalize upon the popular junior ranger programs. I'm going to assume that most people in this group know what a junior ranger program is. If you don't, type so in the chat and Hannah or Jen will give a quick explanation there. But students or the kids, this is a primary way of interacting with kids in national parks where they pick up a book, go out in the park and do activities that vary very widely in nature, and then have an opportunity to earn a badge by submitting in the work that they've done. And so the National Park Service wanted to explore, and this became ever more timely this month or this year, what the possibilities could be for a digital junior ranger program. What might that look like? How might the effectiveness of the junior ranger program that we've seen in the hard copy format be translated to digital? And what are the goals and outcomes around that? So we put together a team. This is our team of students. Some of the students, we've had many students working on this project over the last 2 years. We've had graduate students, we've had undergraduate students, and we've engaged a team of high school students as well. And our work has been to travel to trails and get to know the issues and the resources and opportunities associated with those trails, to meet with professionals to study best practices and compile that information and make recommendations to the National Trails program. And so we've, of course, throughout been exploring digital questions and what people are learning in these places and how the digital format is enhancing their learning or helping their learning as they move through these places. And Jen's going to talk in just a moment about how we set up a prototype system where we helped students. We started working in paper format, just trying to understand learning about National Historic Trails. We took it out into the field and talked to kids all around the West and had them experiment and play with our prototypes, and then gradually developed a digital prototype that Jen will introduce in just a moment. But before she does that, I want to spend just a few minutes allowing you to reflect upon these circumstances. So you've been given a challenge. We are passing off our challenge to you of developing a digital format of a junior ranger program to help kids connect to National Historic Trails. Our target age group is 9 through 12, and we're really thinking broadly about kids wherever they are. So 3 questions to think about. What are the challenges and opportunities of an online junior ranger program? What's exciting about this? What can you do online that you can't do in other ways? But what are the particular challenges that come about from doing this online? If you were tasked with developing such a program, what would you want to know? What do you see as the research gaps? And then just your gut responses right off the bat. What are the program must-haves? If you were to develop a program tomorrow, what would that program have to include? So I'm going to ask you to go to onlinequestions.org, pull up a separate tab on your screen. Pretty simple format here, just type in the URL and then put in this event number of 11060, and you'll see these sticky notes come up. And take just a few minutes to fill in these sticky notes, to write down what you see as the challenges and opportunities, what you see as the research gaps, or what you see as the program must-haves. So you can change the color of your sticky note accordingly, and go ahead and update, or put them according to color. The second thing that you can do is you can actually vote then. If someone else puts up an idea that you really like, click on the star on the upper left-hand side and vote on it, and we'll watch. You can actually sort the sticky tabs by votes, and we'll see which of those must-haves rise to the surface first and foremost. What are the research gaps that we really identify, or what do we see as challenges and opportunities? So go ahead and log on to onlinequestions.org. The event number is right there. I think I put it in the chat box, but now I can't get to my chat box to share it. And take a couple minutes to share a few of your ideas. Actually turn it over to Jennifer Fenwick to talk a little bit more about our prototype development. Before I do that, I'm going to put a link in the chat box. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but I uploaded my PowerPoint to OneDrive on the ideas in EE research. So if you want to reference any of those studies in your discussions coming up, you can maybe pull up that link. So Jen, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm gonna share my screen here. All right, look good, thumbs up. Melanie, you see that? Okay, so I'm talking about prototypes. I just want to give you a short explanation of the prototype process and the evolution of them during the Digital Junior Ranger Fellowship. These prototypes were developed to answer our research questions and were informed by an ever-growing literature review along with existing Junior Ranger booklets. Developing a product can be really expensive, and that's why creating a prototype first is advised. A prototype can be a blueprint for a product idea, and you can test it along the way to see if anything needs to be tweaked. The testing and prototype iterations will inform the ultimate product production. Dr. Armstrong introduced us to IDEO, Innovation, Design, Engineering, and Organization, as a framework for developing these prototypes. It's a process that guided us to create and not forget the research questions we were trying to answer. And we use themes of National Historic Trails as a tool or even as a boundary to shape our activities. I'm going to quickly walk you through the evolution of our prototypes. Our first prototype was simple and involved 3 physical stations at a Boys and Girls Club. While showing this map, we briefly described the Santa Fe Trail and that every station along the trail represented a stop. The first station contained questions on paper and asked which devices do kids like to play games on, which trail activities are most interesting, and what style of image is most appealing. The second station asked, how do kids like to take in information? We used Jane Goodall's story casted in 3 ways: video, audio only, and text with photos. And the third station offered 3 iPad games for kids to play. We also handed out avatar stickers before they started their journey so that we could begin to understand whether kids preferred characters or animals. And at each station, they could earn a puzzle piece. If they obtained all 4, then they won a prize. We were beginning to address what incentivizes children to play. So these were really simple activities that utilized existing images and videos, but it was helping us to answer our research questions. Our second prototype utilized a Voki presentation. The Voki platform allows you to record your voice through an animated character. We used a dog named Scout to guide kids along the trail. While images were casted on a screen, kids participated by writing responses and gave feedback on a paper worksheet. We tested customization with a build your own wagon activity, whether art could help kids connect with historical markers like Independence Rock. We asked, how do kids deal with difficult subjects? With a few journal readings and a time for participants to write a reflection. And lastly, a would you rather activity tested whether choice and points were popular among participants. And then COVID-19 struck, which meant that in-person testing was not an option. It pushed our team to begin developing fully digital activities. While our computer science teammates were developing a website, we created a draft website with the website builder Weebly. This allowed us to house our own creations with existing activities in one domain. Each activity was coupled with a short survey. In total, we received around 200 responses. We promoted the website through online Zoom events and through social media platforms. Our last prototype iteration was the official Digital Junior Ranger website. As mentioned in the last slide, 2 undergrad computer science students developed the site. One huge benefit of having our own website was being able to create our own activities, which required more customizations, like this Oregon Trail maze you see on the screen. Additionally, on the draft Weebly website, you had to return to the main page in order to take the survey. On the official website, for most activities, the survey was embedded on the same page as the activity. Lastly, our survey questions were more pointed to answer our research questions and overall recommendations to National Historic Trails. I hope this run through our prototypes inspires you to create your own that addresses the questions and interest of your organizations. I know that was really fast, but I wanted to give us enough time in our breakout rooms. And so we're gonna split up now into 4 rooms, and you're gonna be able to actually participate in some of these prototypes that we created or housed on a website. So Rose, if you don't mind, you can separate us into 4 rooms. Is there anything else, team, that you wanna add before we go?
Just don't forget to record in the breakout rooms.
So my
Okay.
question is, do you want 4 rooms or rooms with 4 people?
4
4
rooms
Okay.
and 1 of us in each room.
I'm sorry, I did not understand I put you in, let me redo this.
Okay.
I thought we wanted,
Well, while Rose is doing that, maybe it would be a good idea to quickly review some of the questions that were asked there. I know that some folks have been following along in the chat, but it sounds like there's some discussion about getting resources out of the firewall. And then just quickly, what were some of the websites that you used to help craft up your Junior Ranger program?
I can talk quickly about some of the websites that we use to create or to place our prototypes onto. So, and we can dive a little bit more into that discussion once we get into our breakout rooms. But essentially, so one person asked, I think in the chat box, about Voki, and so Voki was a dog that we had that guided the user through the prototype or through the activity. And so Voki is it's an app, it's a website that offers you the chance to pick a caricature, and then you record your voice basically onto it, and then you can press play and then insert it into a program, an activity that you've created. And it looks like Melanie just shared a link to the resources, so let us know if that doesn't work. And we can also compile everything that we've talked about into like a cohesive document at the end, so it's not like clicking it, trying to find it within the chat box. So I think, yeah, both Jen and I put a link to Voki, so it is a great resource. And then for the prototypes themselves, each prototype is a bit different. I think once you get the chance to explore the websites that we've created in the breakout sessions, it will make more sense. Yeah, I don't know if that answered people's questions or if I just rambled, but Rose, I don't know if we can help you at all.
While everyone's kind of coming back, I did want to post a link to a Google Doc that has all the digital resources you mentioned in the icebreaker. So you can look at those, and I'll turn it back to you, Hannah.
Okay. So as I was chatting with my breakout session, we started talking about some recommendations and some feedback and tools that you can utilize as being an environmental educator with various subjects. So I just wanted to real quickly talk about some of these recommendations, and I'll preface with quickly. So if you want to spend some more time chatting with me or any of us after, we're really willing, or I can share my presentation as well. And so can you all see my screen? Okay, I was like, oh dear, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, so as I said, I'm going to touch quickly on these recommendations. And so the first recommendation that I'm going to be talking about is how to effectively integrate difficult subjects into programs, classroom settings, the whole broad spectrum of EE. And I think one of the first things to remember is, and to recognize is understanding where young people stand in understanding difficult subjects, right? And I think in many cases that young people today, or younger people today, understand and have interacted with these difficult subjects much more than we as adults let on or understand. So we need to give them credit when we're trying to integrate these subjects into our programming. So, and difficult subjects in this case, can range from death, which obviously people on the trail experienced all the time and people experience today, racism, which they experienced on the trail, they experience today, and a modern day issue, climate change, which maybe it could be argued was happening when the trail were in use as well. But anyway, so the best ways, or we did research over these last 2 years, and we're continuing to do research on these subjects. But this is kind of a condensed list. It doesn't include all the best approaches or the tools. But one effective way is doing things like the use of images, ensuring that you have images, ensuring that you have hands-on elements, and making connections to modern day issues using metaphors, discussion, storytelling, and media. And then Melanie also touched on engaging with experts, addressing misconceptions, and implementing school or community-wide projects. And these are really great techniques. I read an article on about how to engage young people with climate change. And so these last 3, maybe arguably last 4, are really great for climate change, but obviously great just for any topic as well. And so I got the chance to chat with a gentleman named Dr. Jules, who is a middle school teacher, and he obviously wholeheartedly believes that incorporation of difficult subjects into the classroom. And it was really refreshing for him, or for me rather, to hear him say he's used these elements and they've been effective within his classroom. And so these are just a couple examples of things that you can do, tools that you can use to effectively integrate difficult subjects into that EE setting. And then another recommendation that we have come up with is using digital techniques to connect people to a place, wherever that place may be. And so a couple of approaches or techniques that you can do is using digital games, using gamification techniques such as choice and leaderboards and badges, and then also using digital storytelling and journaling. And I think a really important one here is sharing and debriefing. And that could be with you as the teacher or the program lead to the student or the attendee, or it can be student to student, or even student with themselves or attendee with themselves. But I think this idea of sharing and debriefing is really important, and it can be done from a digital perspective, which is really, really nice. So I wish I could dwell on this longer, but I'm gonna go to the next one. And another technique, another recommendation that we created when thinking about the Digital Junior Ranger program was this whole idea of incentivization and motivating users in an online era, and how you can do that effectively. And so incentives is probably something you're all well aware of. But I think what we found is including things like badges and having a sticker or something that they can walk away with is really a key component. I also read some other studies where they were talking about rewards in the sense of like virtual field trips and points and leaderboards and progress bars. And so you would obviously offer that after completing a task. And then also integrating gamification techniques. So having that opportunity of choice and also including some kind of element of competition. So that was a really quick breeze through of my recommendations, of the recommendations that we all have been doing research on. I can't take credit for learning all of that. I had my colleagues help as well. But if you want to learn more and to chat more about these recommendations, I'd love to spend some time with you all, or if you want my PowerPoint, I'd love to do that as well. So I'm gonna send it over to Amanda to wrap things up. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you all for participating. That was a whirlwind, as Melanie stated earlier, of information and just interaction. So we just want to thank you all for being here and for participating and for your feedback. And it was a joy. So I am going to post into the chat our official Junior Ranger webpage for you all to please share with your organizations and distribute as you see fit, with this, as Melanie stated, and our team has our team would love continued feedback, and we're continuing the research project, so please distribute that and share with the world. So also, I just wanted to remind you all of the digital resources that Jen will be compiling from the icebreaker earlier that have been helpful in these times of COVID and beyond. So be looking for that to add to your repertoire as well. And again, thank you so much. You all are wonderful, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much to this team from Western Colorado, Melanie, Jennifer, Hannah, and Amanda. This has been an awesome session. Thanks for sharing it with us today. We hope that you participants have learned some new strategies or tools to take away. The shared files from today's session will be found in Sketch, linked to this session now or by Monday for sure. We finally thank you all for joining us. Now, get up, stretch, step away from the screen, and enjoy a quick self-care activity before your next session. So what we'd like you to do for your self-care activity today is to spin around like the ripples in a lake. Have a great day. We'll see you at the next session.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and please feel free to reach out anytime to get involved in this project.
Thank you all so much.